Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's enjoying today's Afro Future Summit. I've been listening in the background to some of the other speakers. What a terrific panel and presentation from the Obama Foundation. I hope everyone is taking care out there. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about innovation and our futures. I want to make sure that everyone, I just want to say, I hope everyone's taking really good care. We know we continue to see a lot of stressors out there in the world. So really hope everyone's taking good care. And of course, thank you to everyone behind the scenes who's making this conference possible today. So I work at NYU. NYU is a global network. It's the largest private institution in the United States, and we have campuses in places like Ghana. We have Sydney. We have 2 campuses, one in Abu Dhabi and Shanghai. So I'm constantly thinking about how we network the world, to go back to what Mike from the Obama Foundation was saying, right? How do we think about this across our areas? We know that we're still impacted by racial disparities and the legacies, and some of people have already talked about this in terms of digital exclusion, resource access, legal battles that we're still fighting, banking, housing, and of course, as we think about differential investments in terms of entrepreneurial and of course, startup companies. This disproportionate impact is not new. We know it is grounded in a lot of different historical legacies. And of course, as we think about the massive amounts of scholarship, and we've seen this obviously during COVID as well. I have a few slides here today, but these slides, I'm not going to go through it, just to remind us that we have a history, right, of apartheid, histories of segregation that lead to digital exclusions and intersectional biases. So one of the things that I really also like to just draw our attention to is, if we think about what's happening with Black people globally, we also know there are differential impacts in terms of Black women, Black children, etc. This is a slide from the United States that talks about the intersectional impact. And if we think about the wealth gap in the United States, and this is really in relation to investments. So if we think about investments in startups and think about microfinancing for women and companies across the globe, we really need to think about that microfinancing in advanced ways. Because if we think about the wealth gap just here in the United States, white women, right, the median wealth for white women between the ages of 18 and 64, right, is about 36 and 49, excuse me, is $42,000. For Black women, it's $5. So $42,000 and $5. That's the legacy impact. So we're talking about investments. We really have to think about how those investments are made. To go back to what Mike and others have been saying about the digital divide, we know that we have a digital divide across the world. And we also know that there's an intersection with, right, socioeconomics. The global cost, the wealth gap between American whites and Blacks, is projected to cost the U.S. economy, just the U.S. economy, $1 trillion and $1.5 trillion between 2019 and 2028. So if we think about that, right, France could jump its GDP by 1.5% over the next 20 years. And we think about Brazil. I just use these statistics to talk about those global costs. We know that we have disruptors everywhere, right? Whether it's technology disruptors, cognition, automation of jobs, etc. And the other piece that I like to say is framing matters. To go back to what Mike was saying from the Obama Foundation, one of the ways that Obama, and I think if we even think about the legacy of someone like Martin Luther King, is they began to frame, right, Black and emerging populations as assets instead of deficits. So the actions that have been taken, right, if you think about even what Mike was talking about, the other form of work is individual, interpersonal, institutional, and structural. And those are the actions that we have to take. So if we think about the individual investments and then institutional structures that allow for those investments to grow. I say that part of the practice that we need to engage is this practice called transformation. I have the pleasure of being a chief diversity officer, and in South Africa, they call us chief transformation officers. So chief strategy, chief transformation, about transforming society and moving into this asset and strength model that I mentioned earlier, and really thinking about what are the growth opportunities if we think about global Blackness, if we think about digitization and interconnectedness, if we thought about global broadband access, right? And we know we have some measures here in the United States even at the legal levels to think about how do we create that. Digital inclusion and collective empowerment, and so many people have been talking about this, right? Ensuring that we have the robust services and access to resources that would allow for that digital inclusion. The digital collaborative revolution, and since so many speakers have talked about this before, I'm not going to go into as much detail as I normally would. But if we think about data science, hackers programs, this is part of what we call the collaborative revolution. And to go back, right, our work at NYU, for instance, we just did this very large hackathon, and it was a global hackathon, bringing together people from Ghana, people from Abu Dhabi, and people from the United States to hack on and to solve problems that face society today. And one of those was to really think about digitization and access in terms of next steps. Innovation, as we know, requires a diverse mix of people. And as we think about that, that brand value, then one of the things that I try to talk about a lot is then how do we think about the brand value of the global digital growth? And we know that this digital growth is also happening in places like Eritrea, for instance, where we're seeing kids take computer parts and put those parts back together, right? So we have to also think about that, the ways in which we're seeing growth in ways that are sometimes not measured. So as we think about even these slides, what I say is we have to dig deeper into those measurements. I do a lot of work actually across the continent and get to work with, right, emerging populations. And as we think about that, we have to think about the sustainability, the environment, the social, and the governance, and then how we're engaging, of course, individuals. What I say here, and I'll just pause here to say here at NYU, I sort of alluded to this, we're engaging in multi-sector partnerships. Everything from thinking about the creation of cyber academies, and some of you may have heard about these cyber academies with the government, to funnel and create new pathways and pipelines for individuals, to really think about multi-sector partnerships with organizations, right, like Zoom. One of the reasons you're able to put your pronouns into Zoom today is because of NYU. We had a partnership with, right, Zoom to make that happen. And as we go on, of course, we continue to do these partnerships. I heard earlier about archives. We have a new partnership to really think about archiving the work of Black women and digitizing that work, because we know globally there is no digitization of that work. Tapping into transgenerational opportunities, I cannot say enough about this. Later, I have a slide that'll talk about the Senegal project, which is a project where grandmothers are teaching young people, right, about health and wellness around their bodies. And young people are teaching older people about how to use technology in an organization called Teen Years. So when we think about generations, what I say is, what are the opportunities? And to go back to what others have said, there are lots of opportunities, but far too often we stereotype the generations. And if we're going to think about Black possibility, we know that those generations, our time is now, as Stacey Abrams has said. And if we think about the legacies of media, I was so glad to hear Mike talk about these legacies, particularly in the Obama administration. But we know that Black people have used media in really strong and positive ways prior to the Obama administration. Decolonialism, abolition, the civil rights movement with Fannie Lou Hamer and people like Martin Luther King Jr., etc., using the media to transform, to change society. So how do we continue to do that? Obviously, Obama, Black Lives Matter, and thinking about, I cannot say enough about digital archives, because digital archives allow us to collect that information that can rectify the histories that and actually record the histories that have been lost, to allow for greater investments. And we can think about the museum, the new museum focused on people of African descent here in the United States. The opportunities are endless. The combined Black spending by Black households has increased, many of you know, by 5%, outpacing white households by 3%. Right? The median age of Black Americans is 34. They're a decade younger. And thinking about the medium, and we think about the growth opportunities in emerging populations, if you go back to that generation slide that I just showed you, what we know is people of color. There are more people of color, more people of African descent, more people of mixed descent, including of African descent, in those Gen Z and, of course, Alpha populations. And they are 12% more likely, right, to use their phones, and 3 times more likely to use their brand to think about social causes, right? So if we think about the investments from organizations, we think about the investments in terms of changing society, and wooing the Black consumer is a $300 billion opportunity. So just investing in our own companies, let alone investments from outside, we can drive the impact and outsized profits in terms of those investments. The New Different is an article that I wrote, which is about thinking about what we can do differently. Instead of people keep saying we're going to go back to the new normal, I say it's time to think about differently. Afrofuturism, right? As we think about Afrofuturism, I love the Afrofuturists. For those of you who are not part of that organization, you should really think about joining and thinking about Blacks in robotics, right? What will representation look like in terms of AI? We just started a new AI center here at NYU focused on, right, looking at the intersections of race and gender to think about what will algorithms look like in the future. We also have a new project actually also looking at robotics. As we think about the new, different, and sustainable possibilities, I already mentioned the Grandmother Project in Senegal, building Black wealth. I already talked a little bit about that. But one of the things that I like to talk about is a lot is space travel. If we can go to Mars, we can make a difference, right? And we can invest in things differently than we have in the past and think about those Black futures. And that is what we're trying to do here at NYU. So again, thinking about partnerships with organizations like Black Girls Code, right? And investing in those partnerships to move things forward. Collective work, and sometimes we are atomized in our work, and the collective possibilities are endless. I end with these two quotes. If you're silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it, by Zora Neale Hurston. And so we have to, of course, continue to articulate. And congratulations to all of the people on the panels, et cetera, who've been talking about where we are. And the world is before you, and you need not take it or leave it as you was when you came in. We can transform. We can invest in ourselves. We can create digital archives and digital futures that look different than the past. And we can think about these entrepreneurial and innovation opportunities as a collective to bring us together across countries and nations. Again, I think the best work will happen across these sectors and bringing multi-sectors together. Higher education with government, with corporations. If we're going to solve big problems and really think about access and resources, we're going to need to bring those types of organizations together. Corporations aren't going to be able to do it by themselves. Higher ed won't be able to do it by themselves, and neither will governments. And that is what we're starting to see. We saw it during the COVID pandemic, and this is the time to really think about those multi-sector, multi-dimensional partnerships that allow for new kinds of investment and resource allocations. Thank you very much. I'm so appreciative, and I hope that everyone continues to take very good care.